you don't have to pay the IRS even if you owe. And yes, there is real life scenarios just like this. So let's break it down. Hi, I'm Shanta Thomas. I'm a tax strategist by day and I'm a coach's wife by night. Welcome. I want to talk to you guys about scenarios in which you may be getting a notification from the IRS that you owe, but in reality, you don't actually owe. And I think this is really important to talk about because I've had two scenarios like this, which happened this past year, both of them. And in both cases, clients were preparing to owe a huge balance, to start paying a huge balance that they didn't actually owe. And so I want to break all of this down and help you understand in what type of scenarios you shouldn't be actually paying, even if you owe. So the first scenario I want to bring to your attention was for a client that I was working on who had an outstanding balance, but part of the balance was greater than 10 years old. So to help you understand, the IRS can only collect from you for a total of 10 years. There are things that can extend that amount of time, so it can be more than 10 years. And there are things that that you may not be aware of that can do that. In this particular case, there was nothing that extended it, and we found out that there were two balances out of their total balances, which equated to about $17,000 that the client didn't owe. But the IRS was trying to pressure them to not only pay this balance, but to pay this balance quickly and pay this balance soon. And so what they asked my client to do was to jump in and start paying this outrageous monthly amount, which is about $900 a month. And the reason why they wanted them to pay so much a month is because they were saying that these two balances were going to expire in October, and so they wanted them to pay them before they actually expired. Well, reality was it had already expired. It expired last year in late last year and early this year, 2025. So the client didn't actually owe it at all. And so when they were trying to do this on their own, the IRS was like, no, you owe this balance, and so therefore you're going to have to pay this balance. And the only way that you're going to get around to setting up an installment agreement so that you're in compliance with us is if you pay this monthly amount, which was a lot. And so the client hired me, and then when they hired me, I immediately looked at the transcripts that I received from the IRS and said, my client doesn't owe this balance. Because they don't owe this balance, we're not going to pay this balance. And the I don't see where they are not supposed to pay this balance. And I said, well, despite what you think, the client actually doesn't owe this balance, and therefore they're not going to pay it. And so shortly thereafter, we received a letter in the mail that's right, $17,000 of the money that the IRS said they owed, they didn't owe, and they did not have to pay. And so the main thing that happened in this situation that I want you to be aware of is there are expiration dates when it comes to debt, and the IRS cannot force you to make payments on debt that's expired. You start paying it, they're going to accept it, and they won't refund you for it. They won't refund you, nor will they apply it to a different year if you, in fact, did not owe it. So the best thing that you can do is not pay it if you don't owe it. You have to know what your expiration dates are for all of your debts, and those expiration dates will guide you and tell you when you should and should be paying something. In this case, this client was able to save $17,000 that the IRS were trying to get them to pay that they could not pay. The IRS knew they couldn't pay, but they were going to have them pay it anyway, even though they didn't owe it. That brings me to my second case. So I had another case, which I'm still in the middle of. This client owed $90,000. And so what we found out was the reason why they owed $90,000 was there were some errors in their bookkeeping. We made the adjustments. And so once we made the adjustments, while they were in audit, we were able to determine that instead of $90,000, they only owed $12,000. Well, they already had made $12,000 worth of payments. So it actually was a wash. They weren't going to owe anything further. So we applied for them to do, we submitted all this information to the auditor who was auditing their books. The auditor accepted everything. Now, when the auditor accepts everything, that means all the information that we were giving them to prove that the client's books were inaccurate the first time, which said they owed $90,000, and now the books are accurate, saying that they only owe $12,000, meant that we were correct. So the IRS said, okay, You're correct. You actually only owe $12,000. You've already paid $12,000. Therefore, you don't owe anything else. This was in December of 2024. So even though, hi, so somebody was saying, so I am talking about times in which you owe the IRS, but you actually don't have to pay the IRS. And so this is the scenario that I'm going through right now with the client. So that client that owed $90,000, we were able to determine in audit that instead of $90,000, they only owed $12,000. They already made $12,000 worth of payments. Therefore, they don't need to pay anything else. But because that person is in the same industry as me, which is tax, and because they are here on a work visa, the IRS said, we are not going to permit you to be able to do any sort of tax work, nor are we going to permit you to be able to work in the US because you have a large outstanding balance. Now, remember, I said we settled this with the auditor back in December. Normally, when you settle something with an auditor, it does take a few months for it to clear. But we are now in the month of August. So it's been 8 months and it still has not cleared. So they are telling her in order for her to get into compliance so that they can reinstate her work visa and give her the opportunity to continue to do tax, she has to pay $1,200 per month in order for them to reinstate her. And this debt goes back to 2019 and 2020, which means if she begins to pay $1,200 a month, that money, which she doesn't owe, they will not refund her. And they've told us this, they will not refund her if once they determine that she doesn't owe it. So they said, we're not going to refund you, but we are also not going to reinstate your visa. So what should she do in this situation? In a situation like this, if you're in a situation like this, the first thing is you do not want to try and do this on your own, right? So you want to try and get some sort of help or representation. But the second thing is she should not start making payments. The reason she doesn't want to make the payments is if she starts making those payments, they're not going to give her the money back. Even once they disclose, she is correct. Now, the reason why it takes some time is the audit department is not the same as the IRS department that many of you know who correspond with you and tell you that you have an outstanding balance. Those are two different departments. So it does take a few months, but it shouldn't have taken 8 months. Therefore, I have instructed her to not start making those payments, but instead we need to make sure that they have on record and update her account for the audit. So that means the audit, which was approved, we got to make sure those documents get submitted on the other side, that they have it notated in her account so that they can release her work visa so that she can actually start to work. They can release her P10 so she can actually start to work. This is important to not make payments that you don't owe, especially if it goes beyond a 3-year period, because the IRS will only give you a refund for up to 3 years back. And because she's out of that period in time, the IRS is not going to refund her this $1,200 a month that they're asking her for. So obviously she was very upset and frustrated because they had not released her ability to be able to work. But at the same time, her paying that money to start paying down this huge balance that she doesn't owe is only going to further hurt her. And then they're not going to give her any of that money back. So we're going to address it by actually going in and making sure that we have this side of the audit department at the IRS talk to this side, who is actually the ACS department. Is basically the department that's saying whether or not she can get into an installment agreement and those types of things. So the side of the department that is on the collection side, we got to get both of these sides to be able to talk to one another. So there's a few things that we'll look at doing to help our client, but we utilize all services at our disposal, including taxpayer advocacy. We also will submit the information that we have from the auditor because we've already talked to the auditor. The audit is closed. So we will submit that information over to them. And then we have to just really stay on top of it. I'm saying all of this, that in both of those cases, the IRS was pressuring both of my clients to pay huge balances on amounts of money that they do not owe. You may have a large balance in which you do not owe the IRS. And if you have a large balance like that, do not pay. Because, let me back up. If you have a large balance that you owe, especially if you don't think you owe it, and if it's more than 3 years old, I would not start making payments until you talk to a professional. So let me adjust that, because you may in fact owe it and you do have a 10-year time span to pay it. However, there are times in which you do owe something to the IRS, and you're not responsible for the debt. They're saying you owe it on the collection side, but in reality, you've already done all the things to wipe out the debt. So if you've been in a situation like that where it's been wiped out, either through an amendment, through an audit, or whatever the case is, give it time to clear. Work with a professional that can support you in doing that, but give it time to clear. Don't start making those payments if you don't owe it, because depending on how far back it is, they may or may not give you a refund once you overpay, even if they find out that they are wrong. So this is really important. This is a great lesson that I had for both of my clients. We will resolve both of these cases. The one case is resolved at $17,000 that the client owed, or the IRS that they owed that they didn't owe. That's already been resolved. They've removed all the penalty and interest and everything related to those. And then the other case we're still in the middle of. So I will keep you all posted on how that goes. But that $90,000, my client doesn't owe. They don't owe any of it anymore. They paid what they were supposed to pay, which is only $12,000. And that's it. I'm not going to allow them to pay any more than that. So that's all I have. If you have any questions or anything about how this process works or need any support, feel free to to book a call with me. You can find those links in my descriptions. All right. You have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next lesson.